we then thawed and actually tested our embryos that we had, which we knew would run the risk of lowering the quality of them. But I just did not want to go through that again if I could help it.
Welcome to the Infertility Club. I am super excited for today's special guest, Erin Bulcao. She's a mom of three beautiful daughters living in New York City, and she is a big advocate on infertility support. So I am super grateful to have her here. Hi, Erin.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
You?
Oh, thank you so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. This is great. I love doing this.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I know you've been sharing your journey online, and it's been amazing to see the community that you've built around fertility. And I'm just grateful you're up for sharing your journey again.
Yes, of course.
Oh, well, let's jump on into it.
Okay.
What has your journey to parenthood looked like for you?
So we started to try to have kids when I was 26, maybe. Yeah, 26. And long story short, wasn't working. I wasn't getting a period. I wasn't sure what was going on. And so we saw an OB, my OB, and she suggested I go to a fertility clinic. And that's where I found out I wasn't ovulating. So I actually started doing Clomid. That wasn't strong enough. It wasn't working. And then we wanted to start with an IUI to see if that would work. And so we did fertility drugs for that. Your estrogen, breast, all that stuff. Yeah, injections. And it worked. We got pregnant with triplets. And when around 9 weeks, we had to have a medical reduction because I just am pretty small. And the doctor just thought that, it would probably be safest to carry two instead of three for all of us. So it was a hard thing to have to come to terms with after, thinking you weren't going to there's a chance that you can have any kids.
Totally.
And at such a young age, and nobody talked about it. I mean, all the things. So we did it and then never talked about that full thing again. But luckily had the twins at 30, almost 38 weeks vaginally.
That's amazing for a twin pregnancy. Whoa.
Yeah. So they were healthy. They were tiny, but one stayed back in the NICU for about 11 days just so she could gain some weight.
Okay.
Um, and that was that. Then, we cruised through life with twins. So I don't know if cruise is the right word, but it was awesome. First year is a blur, as I'm sure most people will say. And then it's been amazing to watch their bond just get stronger every day. They're best friends. They never fight. It's pretty crazy. I can count how many times I've actually seen them like argue and fight.
Yeah,
Um,
that's amazing.
yeah. So we got so lucky with that. And then when they were around like 6.5, it's not like we weren't trying. We weren't not trying, but we weren't like actively trying. I still didn't have a natural period. So when they were about 6.5, we're like, okay, let's actually try. We knew we'd had to go to the fertility center. So we went back in and we just said we didn't want to do an IUI because we just thought we didn't want to run the risk of multiples again. And so we went into IVF thinking, IUI worked so well for us years ago. So this would probably be a shoe in. And very naively, went through our first transfer. I, did an egg retrieval, all this stuff, and it failed. And that was my only embryo that I had gotten. So it
Okay.
was kind of a shock because, no one really talked about how often these things don't work.
Yeah.
And a sticker shock and I mean all the things.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So we immediately did another retrieval and again had two failed transfers. We had two embryos from there and then kind of decided to take a break that summer, which was really hard to come by because I'm sure most people know when you're trying to have kids, you just want it to happen like that day. Yeah. The break was great. I was very thankful that my husband made us. And then we, gave it another shot. We did another retrieval. This time we were like, maybe we shouldn't. We had PGS tested our embryos prior to that every time. And so probably why we were just landing with one or two normal embryos, so we're like, let's just not test them because I've heard success stories from those that weren't tested. So, obviously we ended up with more embryos that way. Transferred one, had a successful transfer, but miscarried about 9 weeks. We had already heard the heartbeat, and we had already told the twins and everything. Miscarried as in like the heart just stopped. And so I had to take misoprostol pills. I had to pass everything at home, which was pretty traumatic. The clinic asked me to catch whatever I could and bring it in.
Oh my gosh.
So that was, in hindsight, like such a silly move because nothing is testable and it is what it is. But anyway, they were hoping they could get some kind of answer, which they never did. The problem was that I was bleeding for about 3 months, so I call it like a 3-month miscarriage because not everything had passed, and they didn't realize that until 3 months later when I'm still bleeding, um,
My goodness, Erin.
and then I ended up having to have a DNC
Oh my
because
goodness.
that's the only way to clear it out.
Oh.
So, that was pretty traumatic. We then thawed and actually tested our embryos that we had, which we knew would run the risk of, lowering the quality of them.
Mhm.
But I just did not wanna go through that again if I could help it.
Yeah.
So after we did that, I think we ended up with, like, 1 normal embryo, which probably is my answer that that one was just not it was just too abnormal.
Mhm.
Um, Transferred that one, but it didn't work. And then we were just kind of, like, at a standstill. Um
Mhm.
Wasn't really excited about my clinic, about my doctor. I rarely saw him. I just kind of felt like another number. And my girlfriend was like, that's not normal. Like, you should
Mhm.
see if there's others. And she referred me to another clinic, which I loved so much more. And we, moved over there. And this was now like 2.5 years in. Um, did another retrieval. We were like, this will be the last one, tested, and this time we ended up with, was it like 3 or 4? Yeah, it was 3 healthy embryos, and 1, mosaic embryo, so, like, much better results, and I was now 36, um, which is interesting because often, they're like, "Oh, the younger you are, the better," which I think I still believe in that, but you also have to be
Mhm.
healthy and, so many things. We transferred we did 2 transfers back to back, both failed. I was just lost, my, 6th transfer basically had failed, and I was severely depressed just because of,
Yeah.
I mean,
You have been through so much.
aside from that though, like, they don't tell you all the medication and, being on such strong hormones for, gosh, it was almost 3 years, pretty much nonstop, other than the summer
Right.
break we took. It really affects you because you're going up and down so much.
Yeah.
Um, that by that point, even my husband was like, I feel like we need help. Like, how do we help you?" Um, Within that time, I also realized I wasn't too in love with my actual doctor. I love the clinic, I love the nurses, but I had met another doctor at that same clinic who I really liked. Um, and so kind of not kosher, but we switched doctors within the clinic, and I constantly tell people, like, you really have to feel that connection and that, like, safety with your doctor,
For
um,
sure.
and it's not something I realized until that moment, until we did that, I
Mhm.
finally felt like I was taken care of because not that the other doctors weren't great, but our personalities were just not the same,
Yeah. Yeah.
so February of 2020, we decided to transfer our last healthy, normal embryo. My husband's like, I know you, I really didn't want to, but my husband was like, let's just try this last one.
Mhm.
Here we are. We got this new doctor. I really advocated for myself. I checked all my levels this time because I believe that they really do matter, like your D, your E, I mean, all of them, not just like the typical ones that they say.
Wow.
Um, and my lining up to that point had normally just been at about like a 7.5,
Mhm.
even with all the patches and all the things. And the doctors always said, like, that's fine. But, like, you know what, something needs to change. So I said, no, I need more estrogen. And so they actually did the estrogen shots for me,
Wow.
which actually shot of my lining to like a 9.5 by the time transfer came. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So that was really cool. That was a huge change. I
Mhm.
think that it like really supported, you know, we ended up having the transfer and it was successful. And I truly believe that that was one of the things that really helped.
Wow.
And then it was crazy because like 2 weeks later, COVID and all the clinics shut down.
Oh
So
my gosh.
we got
Wow.
really lucky. Yeah. Yeah. So that was that. Obviously we were very cautiously optimistic. Honestly, I was that way the whole time because it was scary to, after so long and so many losses to believe that this was gonna actually come true.
Totally.
But she was born emergency C-section, of course, because that's her personality today, but November 4th, 2020. So, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Wha
Oh my gosh, Erin, that is a roller coaster. You are incredible. You've been through so much.
Yeah. I
And
mean, I just feel like, we all go through our stuff, and that was just my journey, and not to play it
yeah,
down, but, there's been so many great things along the way and things that I can now look back on, and some things I still don't understand, but some things, like, I can, you know,
totally.
navigate with.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So, looking back at your journey, what are some things that you learned about yourself through it?
I think one was, that my voice is actually the strongest voice that I can use. Like, I know myself the best. And for so long, you constantly rely on, what the professionals tell you, and as we should. But whenever there's anything in your gut, my gut telling you that, like, you know, ask the questions or maybe there's a different way. It's always worth exploring and it's worth asking and it's worth talking about. I'm a huge advocate now for um, naturopath work and really understanding your body before you're jumping into all these like hormone things. I actually started working with a naturopath after I stopped breastfeeding Ariella, and I got my period back
Wow.
not having it, and I was just doing, like some seed cycling and different herbs or, things that like my body needs anyway, and vitamins and supplements, and got my period back 3 months in.
Oh my goodness, that's
Oh.
exciting.
Yeah, like, so it just, like, it reminded me that nothing is linear, and not one person will, I think, ever have the exact answer for you because we're all just so complex. And so I really have learned to listen and open other doors and explore and try and but first and foremost really understand like what's happening with me before you go out and get like, "They just give me IVF so I can have a baby," because that's how I was. And I think so many of us, again, when you're trying to just have a baby, you just want what you think is going to get you there because that's what they say is going to happen.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
totally. I know we're like the goal's the baby, and so it's like we're so excited, and it's like wanting it to happen as soon as possible, and
yeah.
and so it's kind of some of those taking a step back sometimes can really help.
Yeah.
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 So you were looking for doctors and ended up switching a few times. Is there anything that any advice you'd give people for that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the reason that I switched was just because I didn't feel supported. My first clinic, I kind of just felt like another number, and it was like I was just giving the same protocol that everybody else was given, and we're
Mhm.
all so different. We all require
Right.
so many different little tweaks here and little tweaks there. And then when I was at the clinic, that I ended up with, I just felt like my doctor wasn't like hearing me. And it kind of felt a little bit like that too, where he was set in his ways, and this is what has always primarily worked for him. Um, but I had, different things that I wanted to explore, and he kind of wasn't, you know, kind of like would shut me down, and not in like a mean way, but yeah. So I I I didn't I don't even know if I'm answering your question, but
Right, right,
uh
totally.
yeah, I just think it's such a gut feeling, honestly, because if you don't feel comfortable with, I mean, with any doctor, right? Or any professional that's trying to help you and you're trying to get somewhere that you have been trying to get to, if you don't feel that support, like
Yeah.
you just need to move on. And it's okay because, ultimately they all want you to get pregnant in theory. That's, in this case. Um, so it might be awkward, and, it was a little bit awkward, but at the end of the day, like, I'm not there to make sure other people are okay, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think that's awesome. Was there any self-care or any things that you did during the process to help during those hard times?
Yeah, I mean, we traveled a lot. We tried to, get away whenever we had a failed transfer or just in general, um, because I also had the twins there who, poor things, like, had to deal with some of my crying. Um I tried to stay on like my regular exercise routine, and that's something I also look back on and would highly suggest people to do, because not moving and not exercising is not going to help your chances. If anything, I think it would lower them, in my opinion. Obviously speak to your doctor. Everybody has different needs and all of that, but for me, for example, I've always been, active. And there were a lot of times when I was too afraid. And I'd be so much more sedentary, and it would just affect my mental health. And,
Right.
your body changes so much. And it wasn't even like for that reason, but it's just that, you know, the last transfer, my doctor actually was like, if you want to go to a soul cycle class, just go. Like, it's fine.
Oh.
And I mean, I didn't go, but it allowed me to feel more at ease with just going on like a longer walk, or,
For sure, for sure. Yeah, there really is something about movement and it's a good distraction.
yeah, absolutely. I do regret not living my life, as much as I should have during those 3 years. I always say that, because I do think that time passes no matter what, and I think we get so caught up in like, "Oh, we can't do this because what if I'm pregnant?" Or, "I'm not gonna book that because what if I'm pregnant?" Or, "I what if I can transfer that week? I'd rather, not do this." And it's
Yeah.
like, there's so many variables that I don't think there was ever a time when I thought I was gonna transfer, I actually transferred, or when I thought I was gonna be pregnant, I was pregnant, or anything. And so
Yeah.
I always say, like, if you can continue to live your life as best as you can and do all the things, within reason, it's I think it would have changed a lot of my mental space.
Yeah, yeah, I could totally see that. Yeah, and it's hard to plan because there's so much what if scenarios, going through the whole infertility and IVF and that whole process. And so it is hard, but I think that's really great advice to just live life and, still plan things. I think that's really great.
Yeah.
something that we tried to do too was, like, plan dates, and just little things to look forward to because it's just nice to have something to be excited about.
For sure, yeah. I mean, anything, it doesn't have to be a big trip, it's just whatever, would work.
Erin, was there any support groups or people that really helped you through this journey?
So, actually I never have been the person to, like, join support groups.
Mhm.
It's just me. Even when I had the twins, are like, "There's so many twin groups." I'm like, "I don't know, it's just not in my personality." But, um, I hadn't shared and I hadn't talked about anything pretty much my entire journey decided to open up, um until I decided to open up on Instagram. And so I wrote a blog about, like, 10 different blogs, and my friend was like, "Well, you gotta share that." I was like, "How?" And she was like, "Instagram." I'm like, "Okay." So I did, and then once I did that, I found this, like, influx of a community that I didn't know existed. And so for me, the reason that I went on there wasn't, like, for anything other than, selfishly myself, because I just felt like I needed to get this out there. And then once people were like, "I see you, I know exactly what you're going through." And it was just incredible. And truly that's what got me through so many dark moments towards the end. And also how so many so many women shared their stories privately because they didn't feel like sharing them out loud, and, were thanking me for being so open. So it just kind of, like, kept motivating me to share and to help because I was like, "Man, I can't imagine not feeling comfortable sharing out there." I mean, I can imagine because I
Yeah.
didn't, but, like, my hope is that, like, everybody feels welcome and open enough to be able to share, but I understand that some just don't. Um, and so that kind of gave me a sense of purpose aside from, having so many amazing women just support me and be able to see, like, they'd literally tell me, like, "I see you, I know what's happening, I know how you feel." And that just felt so good because as much as, like, you want to talk to your husband or your friends who aren't going through IVF, like, they just don't get it. They don't get the feeling. Even today, I was literally, my husband sent me an old photo that he found on, popped up on his phone. And I'm like, he's like, "I love this photo." And I'm like, "I don't." I'm like, "I was in the middle of my miscarriage, like, my body is not my body. I was depressed." And he's like, "It's crazy that that's what you think other than, like, oh, it's a good photo." I'm like, "Because I was going through so much trauma without talking about it, so everything was being internalized." Um, and so I just that community was honestly and still does, they still do get me through a lot of these feelings that continue to come up. And um also therapy. I mean, I have been with my therapist for probably 10 years, of IVF and also other things, but huge believer in self-help.
Oh, yeah, me too. Me too.
Mhm.
Super helpful.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's many things I've been able to work through in life with therapists, and I'm grateful
Yeah,
'cause they just have
absolutely.
tips and ideas that can help that I might not be thinking of, but they come up with, and I'm like, "Oh, that does make sense," or, it's awesome.
Totally. Yeah. Of
Oh.
course.
I love that. So, when you went through IVF after IVF, was there anything that, because on the last one you said boosting up progesterone, you said that really helped. Was there anything else that you did differently the last time that you felt like really helped?
Yeah, so it's boosting up estrogen, but
Estrogen. Okay.
I think again, one thing was just mindset and being with a doctor that I felt was really um, just supporting me in so many ways, aside from obviously I felt like he knew what he was doing. I felt like the other ones knew what they were doing physically, but it was just nice to feel he would explain a lot of things to me,
That
and
I
I felt like that was, like, I really appreciated that, and I would come to him with so many questions, and he wouldn't necessarily debunk them, he would just explain why or why not. Um, so that was huge. I think all of my levels were really good. Like, my prior prior to that last transfer, my D level was very, very low, and I didn't realize, and nobody was like, "Yeah, you should probably check it every few months, not just once a year." Um, so it's just keeping up with, like, what your body's doing because, as much as, yes, you're in a doctor's office and you're getting, the estrogen and the progesterone, you're doing the things they say, like, there's still other things going on, and
Mhm.
that's why, like, I really believe in working with, naturopath or, like, homeopathic help along with a
Yeah.
Western
Yeah.
medicine. I just really do, because there's so much going on. They don't check your hormone levels, they don't check your at least in my clinic, it was only just checking, like, vitamin D and
Mhm.
maybe E, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just the basics.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's great advice. Is there any advice or anything you'd like to say for anyone going through infertility right now?
Um, I think one thing is really remember that your journey is completely different, um, than everybody else's. And as much as, like, obviously there's so many women going through this and it's super helpful to have them, knowing that there's so many people going through it, like, that's a
Mm.
great thing for your mind. On a separate note, like, you have to detach from, like, what worked for her
Mhm.
gonna work for you, because, like, so many people ask me, "Well, what happened at your 7th transfer?" Like, I'm going into my 7th or I'm going into my 5th or my whatever it is. Um, and I always say, like, I'm happy to share what it is. I mean, I blogged about it, but, like, we don't know. We don't know what actually worked, and was it the estrogen, and was it how I felt, and was it I don't know, because there's just no way of knowing. And so remembering that and remembering that, like, you're doing the best you can for you is such a huge flex because I think it kinda takes some of that pressure off, and it is a disease and it is something that, so many people don't say that out loud, but it is, so you're trying to find a cure for your own personal disease. It's not like the common cold where there's like, take this, and more than likely 90% of people feel better.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's really trying to pinpoint what works for you and your body.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, big time. It's really, really true. There's not a cure-all for it, and it's everyone's journey is so different. That's one thing that's been really fascinating is just meeting with women and hearing their stories. Not one has been the same.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're all different. We've all been through, maybe a little piece or similar aspect, but in the end, it's like everyone's journey truly is their own. And especially too, because there's other dynamics too of, or like you already had your twins too. So going through this so many times, like that's another dynamic. Relationships, family, outside, there's just so much that makes everyone's story their own. And that is something to like being on the other side of it, sometimes being able to look and it's like we can be grateful for, some of those things. But yeah, it can be really hard in the moment.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, my situation looked different because I had twins, and even though I had to do fertility treatments for them, like, it was an easier get to, but, it's there's different feelings and there's different, like, everything's different. Yeah, I mean, everybody's different.
Totally. Oh, well, Erin, is there anything else you'd like to share about your journey?
No, I think the nail on the head.
Okay. If listeners want to connect with you or follow along your journey, where's a good spot to do that?
Yeah, just, on Instagram, My Beautiful Blender, and I have a link to my blog and, all the different things that I experienced, especially during IVF, and I still will blog and, I still try and talk about infertility and everything, and sometimes, like, now the feelings of post-infertility and, all the things that end up coming up, now, even though you're on the other side, it's almost like you have a minute to step back and, like, really digest everything that happened, and there's days that I'm like, "Oh my gosh," I need to talk to my therapist.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't just go away.
Yeah, it is. It's like just new feelings and things come up and it's good to talk about those things and
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love it, and, I just recently started following you on Instagram, but I
Yeah.
love it. It's so fun because love seeing about your family life, and I love that you are a bilingual mom teaching your kids, and, I mean, it's
Yeah.
really fun. You have a lot of really great stuff on there, so I feel like it's an awesome resource, and your website is beautiful, and you just have so
You.
much information on there that I feel like is really helpful for anyone going through the journey, so I definitely recommend checking that out because it's a
Thank you.
great resource.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all that you do and having people on and sharing their stories. I think it's just one of the best ways we can, you know, continue to make change.
Oh, thank you, Erin. I feel the same way. That was like anytime I met someone going through infertility or that had, had some type some type of journey in that realm, I just wanted to learn everything I could because it made me feel connected and hopeful and felt supported and loved. And so, yeah, I hope others can feel that too. And I
Of
appreciate you sharing your story with us. Thank you
course.
so much, Erin.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us here at the Infertility Club. Don't forget, you got this. For more hope, support, and positivity, watch this next video.